the main trends that I have seen is that we want overall a high diversity gut microbiome. I think that's one of the most consistent themes in the research. People with a diverse gut microbiome tend to have better health outcomes.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on today's show, we go and give a different perspective. We have different people that have come on the show talking about the microbiome, the mycobiome, but I think you'll get a different perspective on the microbiome today. With a guest who's returning for the second time, none other than Dr. Austin Perlmutter. But before we get into this conversation, I just want to thank you for really being a part of this podcast. If you're just joining us for the first time, welcome in. This is the Thrive State Podcast. This is a show where I bring you the tools, the techniques, the tactics from world thought leaders in health, longevity, relationships, business, spirituality. Yes, business too, because that is in essence sort of how we express ourselves out to the world, isn't it? So thank you for joining us. So go ahead and hit subscribe if you're just joining us. And for all you who have been continuing to allow this journey to grow, to expand and to lead me for TV shows and meet appearances at the biohacking conference, A Forum, and all that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if it's given you a lot of value, please do us a favor by leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. That's really going to allow the message of the show to continue to grow. And if you haven't already and didn't already know, I released a second edition of my book, Thrive State, and it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon in preventative health. And there's really a lot of additional information there. So Thrive State is where you learn all the levers that you need to take to control the energetics of yourself, of how you are out in the world and how you are this energetic, how it feeds your DNA and gives it information for you to either be in a thrive state that will lead you to more health, more happiness, more human potential, or the stress and survive state that puts us prone to getting chronic symptoms and chronic disease. Well, the second edition goes in deeper as to #1, why some people, even knowing what they need to do for their health, cannot follow through. What's the part of our nervous system and psyche that stops us from becoming our greatest selves? I talk about that and talk about a framework you can use to actually overcome that. We also talk about our state, not only as it pertains to our health and how our state affects every single cell in our body, but actually how our state influences other people. So if you are in a family, if you're in a relationship, if you're a part of a team or an organization, how your state starts to ripple across all these different people and community that you're a part of. And we talk about the Thrive State advantage, that if we can maintain our state, and if our state creates a ripple effect in the people, relationships, organizations that we're a part of, we start to change the fabric of humanity. And speaking of fabric of humanity, I bring on this show today a guest that's going to be talking about the microbiome in a way that's very few scientists or doctors talk about. That is it something completely separate? Can we truly separate ourselves from these microbes that are living within us? Are they truly a part of us and a part of our consciousness? More on that, as well as so much more on how the microbiome affects our health, our mental health, and how all of this is tied to our immune system and how to rejuvenate that. All this on today's podcast with Dr. Austin Perlmutter, who's the managing director of Big Bold Health. He's actually in charge of the company's clinical research, including its first of its kind study of exploring the different effects of plant nutrients on human immune function. Dr. Perlmutter is the son of David Perlmutter, but also a board-certified internal medicine physician, New York Times best-selling author, researcher, educator, and investor in the health and wellness space. He's received his medical degree from the University of Miami and completed his internal medicine residency at Oregon Health and Science University. His focus is on helping identify and resolve the biological basis for stuckness in the body and brain using lifestyle interventions. He hosts the Get the Stuck Out podcast and also a co-producer of the Alzheimer's, The Science of Prevention docuseries. His work on immune-related depression can be seen in peer-reviewed medical literature. His writing has been featured on MedPage Today, Doximity, Kevin MD, Medium, Psychology Today, and Mind Body Green. Dr. Austin is passionate about the science connecting nature with human health. He's a popular speaker on the topic of using nature exposure and food to improve brain function and practices what he preaches by prioritizing vitamin N and prepping healthy moods whenever possible. And on the 5 to Thrive today, we actually find out what is one of his favorite foods and where he likes to go on vacation. All this on today's podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Austin Perlmutter. Austin Perlmutter, welcome back to the Thrive State podcast.
Excited to be here. It's been too long.
It has been way too long. I remember the last time we really got a chance to speak about our medical school training and what it's like to do that, what it's like to be the son of a physician as well. I can't wait to dive into a little bit more of what you're doing out there and really some of the science that you're a part of. I love reading your blogs and whatnot. But as you know, before we even begin the conversation, I need to know if you're fully in, but playing the 5 to Thrive. It's a game show style game where if you were to win the next time we meet, and I believe the last time we met was at the A4M in 2021, the next time we meet, it's going to be healthy meal on me. So the question is, Dr. Perlmutter, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
I'm ready.
Here we go. Question number 1. What is, if you were to travel back in time, what era would you visit?
You know, I'd go at least 10,000 years ago. And the reason for that is there is so much debate over what our Paleolithic ancestors ate before they became hunter-gatherers. And what I would like to know is, how healthy were they really? Everyone believes in this idea that our ancient ancestors were so healthy, were thriving, and I need to see the visual proof so that I can come back and say whether this whole movement is as grounded in reality as we like to believe.
Oh, that would be great. Take me with you if you ever step into a time machine, my friend. Question number 2, that was for 1,000 points and you got the 1,000. Question number 2 is, we're going to be talking about food later, but what is your go-to comfort food?
I don't love the idea of comfort food, right? Because usually comfort food tends to be things that are high in sugar, ultra processed. But if there's one thing that is my go-to as far as kind of a travel snack that is high in calories, maybe a little bit processed, it's almond butter. And it is, you know, one of those things that I know, independent of whatever's going on at the conference or vacation, that is an easy way to get very tasty and relatively high quality calories.
Dr. Perlmutter, is that almond butter in your pocket or are you just happy to see me? No, I'm kidding. That's another 1,000 points. Question number 2. Question number 3 is, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go with something that's relatively generic here, which is the ability to heal people on touch. I guess it's not fully generic. You know, I've thought about flying, invisibility, but I think something that'd be super practical, and I've almost imagined what it would be like, is the ability to basically just go and heal people with a touch. The reality is, as you know very well, as much as modern medicine has come a long way and as much as integrated practice can help, there are so many people for whom it would be amazing to see a significant improvement in symptoms at that time rather than having to wait. So some ability to do that, I think, would be phenomenal.
I almost think, you know, some of the energy healing, the intentions we are when we are stepping in the room with someone, if we can shift their state, and their state basically determines the message that they give to the cells. I do believe we have some of those powers. And you know what? Me being in the room with you, I know you got it, brother. That's another 1,000 points. Question number 4 is, what is your favorite vacation destination?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth between tropical and further north. So Alaska is incredible, giant open spaces. And then I really loved my time in the tropics, specifically in both of these cases, it's being in the water. So it's either somewhere in the Bahamas underwater on a reef that is vibrant, alive, full of fish and other life, or somewhere in Alaska on a river that's relatively unpolluted and filled with fish. But the bottom line is it's nature. Vacation for me is 99% about being somewhere naturally beautiful with people I care about.
Sounds great. Hopefully, I can make that list at some point, because those vacations sound awesome. And the last question for you is, what does Dr. Perlmutter like to do, and how does he unwind after a long day?
Something I'm doing a lot more right now is pickleball. Pickleball is super popular where I'm located. And so when I have time after work and when it's sunny out, which is kind of atypical for many months of the year after work, but when it is sunny, there's a set of pickleball courts and just go play pickup pickleball. But the other thing that I've been getting more into is getting underwater photos with my iPhone. So I just recently invested in an underwater photo case and been trying to get more kind of surf photography and pictures of sunsets, but ideally with the camera half in, half out of the water. So over under shots.
Well, some interesting hobbies. And you know what? You're on. The next time I see you, I can't play in pickleball, but I think I could try to take you. 5,000 points out of 5,000 points. You win the 5 to Thrive, which means healthy meal on me that might have a little almond butter in it. Who knows? We'll see.
There you go.
So let's dive into some of the work, that you're doing and you love talking about, that I love reading about. Let me ask you, when did you finish medical school? What year did you graduate?
Oof, I think that's a tough question. So that would be somewhere around like 8 years ago, I guess, at this point. No, it'd be a little bit more because medical school. But let's say about eight or 9 years ago.
Okay, about 8 or 9 years ago. So we're talking maybe 2015, 2014?
Yep, 2015.
Okay, so I finished medical school in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, did you have any courses or professors teaching you about the microbiome when you went through medical school?
Yeah, it came up, but the thing about it is we always knew about it from the perspective of pathology, right? So C. diff infections, which were the bane of hospitalizations, were a microbiome discussion. And when we're talking about interventions with antibiotics or otherwise, and looking at megacolon on the x-rays, those are microbiome discussions. They were not branded as such. So what there wasn't was really much conversation around interventions designed to support a healthy microbiome. Fecal transplant wasn't really a thing. It was just kind of edging into the protocols and algorithms for refractory C. diff infection. But beyond that, no, we weren't talking about probiotics. We weren't talking about dietary strategies to support a healthy gut.
Yeah, so I find it to be very illuminating that a lot of people are talking about it now, and I love this conversation because I recently had a decision to make. I had my daughter, 2-year-old daughter, got bitten by a dog just underneath her eye. It was affecting her lower eyelid, and it was spreading, and it started to get wider. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God! The pediatrician gave us, Keflex.
Yep.
The gold standard is to give somebody Augmentin, which is a broader course. But in my mind, I was like, do I do this or not? Because I don't want to wreck with her microbiome. More on that in a second. But let's talk about the microbiome. What's living in our gut, and why is it, how does it affect our entire being? Because it seems that it probably has a lot to do with how we feel, the things that we do, and also has ramifications of whether or not we're healthy or has disease. Let's touch on that.
You're absolutely right. What's in your gut is different from what's in my gut. And I want to start there, which is that there is no standardized set of bacteria that every person has within their GI tract. And it's probably the case that the bugs you have within you are the most, if not one of the most, if not the most unique aspect of you, in that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say, 39 trillion, I think is the most recent estimate, bacteria that are living on us. The majority of these bacteria tend to cluster in the large intestine. And so that's really what we're talking about when we talk about the gut microbiome. Now, it's true there are archaea, protists, viruses, other microbes that live in there. When we look at the research, specifically around health outcomes, both disease risk as well as potential interventions, the majority of that has been focused on these groups of bacteria, again, specifically in the large intestine, which is the highest diversity and concentration of bacteria that live in our bodies. Just to round this out a little bit, we are learning now that these microbes live on basically every surface of our body. So you have a skin microbiome, you have a lung microbiome, you have a genitourinary microbiome, and all of these are different as far as their populations, their roles. We're learning a lot now about the oral microbiome and how that's different from the lower intestine microbiome. But suffice it to say that with so many pieces of bacteria and whole bacteria and products of bacteria, it is almost completely accepted that there are effects of the populations of microbes, specifically bacteria, on our health outcomes. And so that has led to a blossoming of research in trying to understand how does this bidirectional interaction between human health and microbe health impact the things that we care about. And we're now understanding that many of those outputs, those outcomes, directly relate to our cognitive state. And that's really where I've been focused, is trying to understand how things that are happening in seemingly distant parts of our body are influencing our brains. So we can get into the specifics of this, but one thing I just like to float out, what gets me is this idea of where we end and the microbiome begins. That there's, when I was in grade school, we had germs. We had a poster of germs in the bathroom, and there were these scary monsters. And obviously, you don't want germs on your body because they were bad. But that was generalized to say bacteria are bad. You don't want these as part of you or within you because they create diseases. I think it's pretty clear that who we are as people, how we think, how we feel, certainly how our immune system functions, are a direct representation of the microbiome within us, and that you can't necessarily detach the identity of a human from the makeup of their microbiome. So us here having this conversation, how we're thinking about these ideas, even how we look, is in part a reflection of the microbes that live within us that are influencing our thoughts, influencing who we are. So it really does get to almost this philosophical, psychological understanding of what it means to be human. And as it relates to health, I think it specifically relates to how do we leverage a healthier microbiome to achieve better health outcomes.
Oh, I love that. We're almost sort of getting spiritual and deep with how we are and the things that constitute us versus not us. Almost lends to a bigger, conversation down the road. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but how we potentially ourselves in this larger organism of humanity, and how do we want to act? How are we interacting with our other fellow cells that make up this larger collective, this bigger organism that is humanity? But let's just go back to the gut at this point. We know it has a lot to do with inflammation, immune health, and other potential chronic diseases. Let's talk about how they're tied in that direction, and then let's move into the mental health next.
Great. So for the last several years, I've been involved with a company called Big Bold Health, and our whole goal, our mission, is to untangle the role of the immune system in human health, but also in just planetary health. And so where we've landed as far as why this is so important is that the immune system, located in basically every organ system within your body, and not just the defense system against microbes, but rather a conduit, a translator, a language that takes data from the outside world and converts it into signals that your body is able to respond to. It's one of the few systems that is in constant communication with the outside world. And it's kind of a real-time regulator of data that we may not necessarily be aware of. So if you are seeing something stressful, you're activating your immune system. If you're hearing something stressful, you're activating your immune system. If you're eating something stressful, by way of in part the gut microbiome, you're activating your immune system. It's always changing. Why does it matter so much in the conversation around gut health? Well, if the immune system is there to translate data from the outside world into changing how our cells and our DNA is used, then it would make sense to locate it in the place with the most exchange of data. This would explain why 70+% of our immune cells are located in our GI tract. And it's because they need to be constantly responding to and learning from what is happening in our gut. So that means both signals from our gut cells as well as signals from the gut microbiome, in addition to all the data that's coming through from food that we eat each day. So really the immune system is set up in a way that it can directly receive that data from the gut and translate it through, for example, the vagus nerve into signals that organs like our brains can process, even below the level of our conscious understanding, to change how we perceive and react to the outside world.
Oh, that's beautiful. I haven't heard anyone speak of that communication, really saying the gut is the biggest sensor. And now we don't not only leverage the different receptors that we have that we have as human beings, but we're leveraging the sensors of all the diversity of the bacteria that's in our gut to be able to sense what's going on in the outside world as well.
That's exactly right. I think of it almost as kind of our cloud of data. Like we have some amount of data that is within our DNA, within our cells, but the majority of the data within our bodies is actually in this cloud, which is our gut microbiome, because we possess 10 to 100 times more bacterial genetic code in our bodies than we do our own. And so if you think about that, that is so much information. So if you eat food, yes, some of it gets directly absorbed. Some of it gets metabolized by enzymes and otherwise. But a lot of that food is acted upon by the gut microbiome into the creation of new products that then influence, for example, our immune cells. So the best example being short chain fatty acids. But also, if you were to eat, let's say, plant contains some of up to 8,000 different phytonutrients, phytochemicals. Those are metabolized by the gut microbiome, become new polyphenols and other phytochemicals, which then can be absorbed by our bodies and then change, because they can penetrate through the blood-brain barrier, how our brain functions. So it's absolutely the case that we have a ton of different data, kind of receptors, antenna, if you want to think about it that way, that are outsourced in the gut microbiome. And it's coming back to the earlier point. It's not as though here's where our human cell ends and the gut microbiome begins. And so this is us and this is where our health ends and our goal is to keep everything out. It's very much the case that we are needing to let in certain types of data from certain healthy bacteria and keep out certain types of data from the unhealthy ones. What we now know is we can actually modulate or change the relative ratios of the healthy to unhealthy bacteria using dietary interventions. So in a way, they're influencing us and we're influencing them. So it's a coexistence that has to be in good balance for the organism, the meta-organism or the larger organism, which is the combination of human cells and microbes, to thrive to a long and healthy life.
This episode of the Thrive State podcast is brought to you by the Thrive State Accelerator. The Thrive State Accelerator is actually a home course that I developed using the exact same techniques I work with my celebrity clients, CEOs, and executives on how to get them to the Thrive State. The Thrive State Accelerator teaches you how to master your 7 bioenergetic elements. That's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thoughts and mindset, as well as purpose. In this Thrive State Accelerator, you're also going to get a bonus module on optimization. That's how I talk about supplementation, peptides, all the optimization techniques I use with my clients to get them to the Thrive state. Now, for some of you who are just joining us for the first time, you guys might be wondering, what is the Thrive state? Well, the Thrive state is actually the energy, the epigenetic environment we give to our cells, telling our DNA how to act and how to respond. And if we want optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, if we can master these 7 bioenergetic elements, our ability to have those 3 things that we just said, optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, is at its greatest. And it also prevents you from getting chronic symptoms like brain fog, being overweight, feeling sluggish, acne, pain, all these chronic symptoms, as well as preventing you from getting chronic disease. So getting to that Thrive state is really getting to that state to master being that very best version of yourself so you could show up for you, for your family, for your business, everything that's important to you. So go ahead, check it out right now at kienvu.com/accelerator and use coupon code podcast25 for 25% off. Now back to the podcast. So good there. You've basically hit on what I wanted to talk about next, which is really the diet. This is a particularly important question because I'm giving my daughter a dose of antibiotics now, and we know that her microbiome will be affected. People probably have gotten antibiotics one reason or another in the past. I know the world is much more conscious about the judicious use of antibiotics, but it seems that probably everybody would have had that at some point. What are the things we should be doing to keep a healthy ecosystem of microbes in our gut? What should we be eating? Does it need to be cyclical? What's the process and approach to having a good, diverse, and healthy gut?
Yeah. Well, I want to start by just coming back to what you said about your daughter. As much as I am a proponent of eating for a healthy microbiome and more or less structuring your life around overall good gut health, I definitely don't want to put out the signal that a person should avoid antibiotics across the board because they're worried about their microbiome. And I think the instance you brought up here, which is concern for a spreading cellulitis secondary to a dog bite, and the question of whether antibiotics should be used, I think based on my understanding, you made a good decision, which was you're doing a risk-benefit analysis. Now, I think that's very different for somebody who's just getting antibiotics for every, upper respiratory infection from a doctor who doesn't have time to necessarily weigh the pros and cons. But to that point, yes, antibiotics mess with the gut microbiome. Yes, they're sometimes still the best solution. So I'm glad you brought that back up. But as it relates to lifestyle strategies for a healthy gut microbiome, you're going to hear every opportunity here for people to bring in some sort of, well, it's cyclical, it's fasting, it's exercise, it's diet, it's sleep. All of it makes a difference. And I think what's still a little bit less clear is what is the ideal microbiome? Is it maximize diversity? Is it maximize number of certain species like Akkermansia that have been linked to better health? Is it minimize the number of certain species that have been linked to worse health? And I think really the main trends that I have seen is that we want overall a high diversity gut microbiome. I think that's one of the most consistent themes in the research. People with a diverse gut microbiome tend to have better health outcomes, tend to have less frailty, tend to have less evidence for even degenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease, may actually have some protection against depression. So it's overall maximization of this idea of gut microbial diversity. And there is some kind of subset analysis for certain types of bugs potentially being better than others, which gets to the question of, should I be supplementing with a probiotic? I, generally speaking, like to keep these types of recommendations a little bit more broad and ideally based in what I appreciate as the existing evidence. So it is not the case that every person is going to benefit from these things. One of the core interventions that people will recommend and that the research supports as far as supporting a healthy microbiome is eating more dietary fiber. Are there people who are going to load up on that fiber and feel bloated and feel GI distress? Yes. So is that necessarily going to be a generalized plan for everyone? No. So one little caveat I'll say before I get into my recommendations is if you're having issues, if you're having GI issues, this is a good thing to see somebody about. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to fix it all with a probiotic or just changing out your dietary plan a little bit. You may need to see a doctor. But to that end, the stuff that I feel like is most consistently associated with a healthier gut state, including a healthier gut microbiome, is one, eating a diversity of foods, specifically plant foods, as this seems to correlate with an increased diversity of the gut microbiome. And this isn't anything that doesn't make sense. If you want a diverse crew of bugs living within you, they don't all like the same foods. So you need to have a little bit of diversity there. One of the things that we now understand is that there are a couple of different aspects of specifically plant foods that seem like they directly correlate with the health of the microbiome. So one of those is the dietary fiber. Most people don't eat enough dietary fiber. I think if you can eat it in actual food, that's a lot better than taking a fiber-based shake, because those taste like junk. But I'm not saying that that is a bad plan. Generally speaking, my recommendation is always eat food as opposed to trying to fix it with some other intervention. But here again, it's eating a diversity of plant foods, minimally processed. And if you can optimize towards plant foods that are rich in what are called these phytonutrients or phytochemicals, specifically polyphenols, which is what gives plants, foods like vegetables, fruits, their color. This is thought to be a good plan for optimizing the diversity of and the overall health of the gut microbiome. And so we can go into some examples of foods that are
Let's
rich
do
in
that
these.
just in case people aren't
For
aware
sure.
of fiber-rich foods or foods that are rich in polyphenols.
Yeah, and I know that this tends to be a relatively longer conversation around the examples and stuff, but let me give you what I think is top line stuff. So there are many different types of fiber. You could eat a piece of cardboard, there would be some fiber in that. Some types of fiber are more correlated with microbiome health, and these are called prebiotic fibers. They have been studied in interventional or in research to correlate with higher levels of healthy microbes. So some examples of these, some foods would be garlic, which is a relatively easy one. Sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes, onions, leeks, dandelion greens, bananas, and oats. These are all sources of a specific type of fiber called prebiotic fiber that appears to have a specific effect on improving the health of certain microbiome correlates. So generally speaking, eating more fiber, good. If you really want to go for it, these might be sources of foods that are richer in this prebiotic fiber. So that's the fiber part of it. You want to do the polyphenols?
Yeah.
Okay. Polyphenols are, again, these plant nutrients. Plants use them to defend themselves against environmental stressors, because unlike you, if for example, sea level was rising where you lived, you probably wouldn't stay there. You'd probably move inland. If sea level rises where a plant lives, it doesn't have that opportunity. So it needs to basically create chemicals that allow it to defend against environmental stress. These are called polyphenols. It's a type of phytochemical. We now understand that polyphenols can actually act as their own type of probiotic or prebiotic, meaning that polyphenols, when consumed, change the gut microbiome. This is relatively new research, in essence, suggesting that there's more to the prebiotic conversation than simply fiber. There are other nutrients in foods. And so food sources that are rich in polyphenols, again, we're talking about diversity of foods. It's primarily plant foods. So looking for colorful fruits and vegetables. Spices actually turn out to be incredibly concentrated sources of polyphenols. So adding whatever spices you like to your meals, but some interesting herbs and spices. So cloves are actually one of the highest sources, but turmeric, for example, another good source. There are also tea and coffee are relatively packed with polyphenols. So it's probably one of the reasons why people who drink things like green tea and coffee without all the added sugar and cream tend to have better health outcomes. It's because of these nutrients that now we are learning may positively impact the gut microbiome. We are in particular at Big Bold Health looking at a plant called Himalayan tartary buckwheat, which is unique in that it's kind of a super rugged plant that somehow has found a way to live in these incredibly inhospitable environments. the way it's done that is because it just goes crazy on the polyphenols and allows it to defend against UV radiation and other environmental stressors. But the idea here is this is actually something you can use in place of something like a wheat flour, which tends to be very low in the things that we want, polyphenols, and also highly processed. So another way to kind of bring in more of these gut-friendly nutrients is to sub out your low polyphenol foods for a higher polyphenol version, like this tartary buckwheat. But the big picture here is eating more real foods. That's fundamental. And yes, these are plant foods. So there are some people who I know have been on your podcast recently who are kind of not as enamored with the idea of plant foods in human health outcomes. I think that's interesting. If you are trying to optimize your gut health based on the available research, the most consistent signal is to eat a diversity of plant-based foods.
That's so awesome. You are one of the few people. Did you come up with this term as I was looking through immuno rejuvenation?
Yeah, I did not come up with that term, but I am quite familiar with it and kind of spend a lot of time around it. So at Big Bold Health, I work with Jeff Bland, who I think you know, and his idea for the last many years has always been to try to bridge the gap between very complex science and a synthesized version that enables people to improve their functional health. And to that end, this man, so I don't know how well you know Jeff Bland's mind, but I think he reads at least a scientific journal each day. And so he'll just send me articles from every journal under the sun. Have you seen this article? No, Jeff, I haven't read the article that came out 3 minutes ago in Nature magazine. But in any case, after looking at all this work, he kind of has been trying to find what are the central systems that drive health. And to that end, he focused in on the immune system. And I came in relatively early in this company, and the whole goal has been to get people to understand that the immune system is probably one of the most important portals to better health.
Yeah.
In that you have 100 plus different types of immune cell signals and transcription pathways within your body. Their relative state of balance or imbalance is well established to be a principal driver of the vast majority of human diseases today. So you can start with the chronic inflammatory disorders. Inflammation, which people think about as this binary good, bad thing, is actually a natural process that when left unchecked in a chronic form becomes a problem. But really, inflammation is just a form of an imbalanced immune system. Then we have the 50 to 100 million Americans with autoimmune disease, similar number with allergies. We have many, many people in the United States, primarily the elderly, that experience some degree of immunosuppression. We've seen this very clearly in the last few years during the pandemic. The bottom line to all of this is if you understand where that immune imbalance is occurring and you can find ways to help rectify that, which we call immunorejuvenation, you may be able to get to some of the core wiring driving disease. Yet, the prevailing dogma in any conversation about immunity in the public sphere is that you have an immune system that's either good or bad, meaning it's low or it's high, and we want to boost it, right? So your immunity is low, you should boost it. You take the vitamin C, good to go. And yet, here again, we have 100 plus different cell signals, cytokines, transcriptional pathways. So you try to force that into this binary two-dimensional arc of up and down, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is a three-dimensional architecture that moves through time. So it's really four-dimensional. And our goal is to try to find interventions in the lifestyle realm that have been scientifically shown to help improve a person's state of immune balance. And that, again, is what we call immunorejuvenation.
So in addition to the diet, which I'm pretty sure it's a large component of, what are some other things that people should be considering?
I'm not going to say anything here that is groundbreaking. There are now understood to be drugs that I'm not necessarily saying somebody takes, but for example, the GLP-1s, we appreciate have immune active effects, but it's really the kind of core lifestyle modifications that we now appreciate act through these immune pathways. Great example would be sleep. I don't know how much you worry about what it is that's actually driving your sleepiness. I mean, we think about things like melatonin. I guess if you want to get technical, you talk about adenosine buildup in the brain. But the way that researchers actually discovered how people or how sleep was built up was by looking at animals and seeing whether there were basically proteins, molecules floating around in the bloodstream that correlated with sleepiness in a wide variety of animals, but dogs. And what they found is this was actually an immune molecule. So to that end, the immune system and even small levels actually of inflammation seem to be key to kicking off sleep. And it may be that one of the reasons why we sleep is actually as a response to kind of a buildup of an immune need, which could explain in part why people who are sick tend to be more fatigued, tend to be sleepier, tend to need that extra rest. The immune system is in overdrive to fight off an infection, and it seems to trigger the body and including the brain to say we need to take it easy and get that extra rest. So the immune system seems to impact sleep, both in terms of quality and in terms of the amount, but also sleep impacts the immune system. So we know that people who get consistently poor sleep tend to show imbalances in their immune system. The key takeaway here is, sure, all that stuff's interesting, but if you're trying to optimize your immune balance, we know that people who are sleep deprived are at higher risk of infections. It makes sense to be paying attention to your sleep. And it's kind of a similar story around things like exercise and sleep. I'll just touch on exercise for 1 second, because exercise turns out to be an inflammatory activity, which people would say, well, wait a second, inflammation's bad. I don't want to increase inflammation, so I shouldn't exercise. And actually, that is kind of the first level of thinking that makes a ton of sense. But if you're trying to think about how you should structure your health interventions over the course of a lifespan, you kind of think about it the way, you might think about getting a degree. Is it necessarily going to be easy to get a degree? No, but you do it because the outcome is better than if you didn't. And similarly, exercise increases inflammation in the short run, but in the long run has an immune balancing effect. So really what we're talking about here is hormesis, a topic many of your listeners are quite familiar with. But the idea comes back to this concept of regulating immune balance, immunorejuvenation. Exercise acts as a rejuvenating force. It may improve things like autophagy, which is the cleaning out of old and damaged cells. And so really you can kind of go down again every aspect of lifestyle modification. The ones that I think are probably most relevant for most people are going to be paying attention to the basics: sleep, exercise, food. And I do think stress is a big one too. We know that stress, chronic stress, is linked to immune dysregulation, higher levels of inflammation. It's much easier for me to tell people don't be stressed than it is to go out and decrease stress. But I do think there are things that everyone can do to mitigate the effects of chronic stress on their physiology and especially on their immune balance.
So good. Really, through the kitchen sink at them at the end there, but you can get the resources on all these lifestyle modifications. Certainly read my book, Thrive State. Before I ask my last question, how do people find out a little bit more about you? I know you write an excellent blog. What's going on with Big Bowl Health? Where do people find more information?
Sure. The two places to go would be my website, which is austinperlmutter.com. I put out a bunch of free content on a lot of the topics we've described here. And then the other one is bigboldhealth.com. And so that's really geared towards education around the immune system and specifically how you can rejuvenate your immune health.
All right. And here's the last question. And I wonder, since both of us don't remember how you answered this the last time, with everything that you've done and seen and experienced thus far in your life, and this answer could be as esoteric as love to the very more physical things such as food. But Austin, what has been your best medicine?
Yeah, I want to think about it for just a second, because there are so many variables that some things are really important at certain times and other things are important each day. So sleep is my most powerful brain medicine on a given day. It is the single biggest driver of how I feel in a given day. Next is exercise. And then I guess next is food. I I guess the most important overall medicine, and it's very apropos of the Surgeon General's recent speech, is the connection, the social connection piece.
Yeah.
I don't require as much social interaction kind of in person as many people I know, who are super extroverted, want to get together every day after work. But I do know that there are a few things that when removed or relatively absent are as caustic to my mental and physical health. And there are a few things that are so significant as far as the benefits I get that I'm willing to sacrifice all the other things: sleep, diet, exercise, as meaningful social connection. So I guess that's probably my answer.
Oh, beautiful. And hope we get to connect again soon. Big hug and meal on me the next time we meet. Thank you for your wisdom and for all these practical takeaways for our audience. Thanks for being on the Thrive State podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if this podcast is bringing a lot of value to you, if you find that your life is just improving with this podcast, that your life is getting to the next level, please consider supporting it. And here's a few ways you can do so. You can do so by liking this video and commenting on this video, and also sharing this video with your friends and family. Another thing you can do is go to ratethispodcast.com/ThriveState. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review there. It will really, really help this show grow. And this will give me more time so that I could actually give more content to you, just like you got in this episode. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of my book, Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance, you can pick it up now. It became a #1 new release in longevity. Go to thrivestatebook.com. And if you enjoy the book, please consider leaving us a review as well. And the last thing you can do, if you're liking everything here and you want to work more closely with me as well as my team to get you into the Thrive State, go to kienvu.com/accelerator and consider joining the home course, the Thrive State Accelerator. It's really the course that I use. It's the concepts that I use personally when I work with CEOs, celebrities, and my high-profile clients to get them to the Thrive State. Again, the Thrive State Accelerator at kienvu.com/accelerator. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want you to save 25% by using the coupon code podcast25. I hope we continue to give value to you. And remember always, you are your best medicine.